got a ton of articles all about the official portraits coming out, ahead of Trump's second term inauguration.
Yeah.
And there's one thing that seems to be like the thing everyone's talking about.
Right.
The resemblance between Trump's portrait and his mugshot from back in 2023.
Oh, yeah.
We've got this article from Sky News that kind of breaks it all down.
Okay.
And then we have another one that's really focused on, the portrait and what it all means.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really interesting to think about, this is more than just a portrait.
Yeah.
This is a statement, as he re-enters the most powerful office in the world.
Absolutely. So let's actually get into the portrait itself.
Okay.
He's wearing, a blue suit, white shirt, blue tie, American flag pin.
Pretty standard.
Yeah. I mean, pretty much what you would expect.
Right.
But then you've got this serious expression. The brow is slightly furrowed, like the head's tilted down a little bit. It's really hard not to see the similarities to that mugshot.
Yeah.
The one that was taken in Georgia after he was charged with trying to interfere with the election.
Right. And, that was a historic mugshot.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the first mugshot of a former U.S. president ever taken.
Exactly.
So do you think this was a deliberate choice to kind of echo that image, or was it just a total coincidence?
I'm kind of leaning toward deliberate.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at J.D. Vance's portrait, the vice president.
All right.
He went for a much more relaxed look.
Yeah.
Smiling arms crossed.
Yeah, much more casual.
It's almost like it makes Trump's portrait look even more serious in comparison.
Right. It really highlights the contrast.
Exactly. And then if you look even further back, to Trump's first portrait in 2017.
Oh, yeah, that one was completely different.
Completely different, big, broad smile, the kind of traditional presidential portrait look.
Right, like what you'd see in a history book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this feels like a very intentional shift in how he wants to present himself. So there's definitely a change in the image that he's projecting. And one of the articles we've got actually quotes this political science professor, Griscoll. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And he basically suggests that Trump's trying to take that moment of legal adversity, the mugshot,
Right.
and turn it into a symbol of strength and resilience.
Interesting take.
Yeah. Do you think there's anything to that?
I mean, it's definitely provocative.
Yeah.
It suggests that he's not shying away from that controversy at all. He's almost embracing it, turning it into a badge of honor.
So what does that say about his approach to this second term?
Well,
Could leaning into this whole fighter persona, could it backfire, maybe alienate some people he needs to work with?
well, that's a really good question. That's kind of what makes this whole portrait thing so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's more than just a picture.
Yeah.
It's like a preview of how he might try to govern.
Like a roadmap.
Exactly. And it could be a sign that he's going to be even more uncompromising than before, even more willing to challenge the status quo.
And you see that same going hard idea
Yeah.
in the way the Trump-Vance transition team announced these portraits.
Right.
They actually use the phrase going hard in their press release,
Wow.
even threw in a fire emoji. It's a very different approach from back in 2017 when Trump and Pence's official portraits were delayed for 9 months after the inauguration.
Right. Totally different approach this time.
This feels calculated. Like they're trying to really control the story and get people talking right from the get-go.
The timing is definitely strategic.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're saying, we're back, we're bolder than ever, and we're going to do things our way.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, what will this going hard approach actually look like in practice,
Right. It's one thing to project this image of defiance and strength, but what does that mean for his actual policies? What are the challenges he might face taking this approach?
Well, one of the biggest challenges he might face is, with a potentially more divided Congress governing by executive order and decree, which he did a lot of in his first term.
Right.
It might not be as effective.
Yeah.
This portrait, this whole persona,
Right.
it suggests he's going to double down on that approach,
Yeah.
which could lead to even more gridlock.
It's a really good point. And, thinking back to his first term, a lot of his policies were challenged in court.
Yeah, they face a ton of legal challenges.
So this defiance, this going hard mentality, could it actually make him more vulnerable to that kind of pushback?
It's definitely possible.
Yeah.
And that's where the potential consequences of this image, they really come into focus.
Right.
If he's seen as being too aggressive, too defiant,
Yeah.
it could actually energize the opposition, make it even harder to get things done.
It's interesting, though, because you could also see this portrait as a message to his base.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like he's saying, I'm still fighting for you. I'm not backing down no matter what.
Exactly. And in this political climate, where everything's so polarized,
Yeah.
that message of strength, that unwavering commitment, it can be really powerful.
Right.
It reinforces that us versus them idea that's been so central to his whole political identity.
And that ties back to what you were saying about the timing of when they release this portrait.
Right.
It's not just about controlling the narrative.
Yeah.
It's also about energizing his supporters.
Absolutely. Releasing it just days before the inauguration when the whole world is watching.
Uh-huh.
It's a way to rally his base.
Right.
Remind them why they supported him in the first place.
This feels like a calculated risk.
Yeah.
It might alienate some people,
Yeah.
but it could also galvanize his base. Maybe give him more leverage, even with a divided Congress.
Right.
It's almost like a preemptive strike against anyone who might try to undermine him in the second term.
It's definitely a bold strategy.
Yeah, but what about the potential backlash? How do you think this might affect his relationships with world leaders, with foreign governments?
That's a great question. I mean, we already saw some strained relationships during his first term.
Right.
And if this portrait is anything to go by, it seems like he's doubling down on that America First approach.
Yeah.
Which could further isolate the U.S. on the global stage.
It's going to be interesting to see how this is received internationally.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the reactions are going to be all over the place.
Right.
Some leaders might see this as a sign of strength. Yeah. Like a signal that he's not someone to be messed with.
Yeah.
Others might see it as more evidence that he's unpredictable.
Right.
That he doesn't care about international norms.
So this image, whether intentionally or not, is already having ripple effects that go way beyond U.S. borders.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that a president's image, the persona they project,
Right.
it's not just about domestic politics. It affects global diplomacy, international relations, the whole perception of American power.
This portrait has definitely gotten people talking.
It sure has.
And it seems like everyone's trying to figure out what the message is behind it.
Well, and that's what makes it so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's like a Rorschach test for how people view Trump and his presidency.
Right.
It forces us to confront our own biases, our own assumptions.
For some people, this portrait might be like their worst fears confirmed.
Yeah.
Reinforcing this idea that he's authoritarian and divisive and dangerous.
Well, for others, it might actually strengthen their admiration.
Yeah.
They see it as a sign of his resilience,
Yeah.
His unwavering commitment to his beliefs, his refusal to back down to the establishment.
It's almost like this portrait has become a symbol of how divided the country is. It's like it reflects back to us our own anxieties, our own hopes and fears about the future.
And it forces us to confront some uncomfortable questions about leadership in a time of crisis.
Yeah.
What qualities do we value in a leader? Do we prioritize strength and decisiveness over diplomacy and consensus building? Are we willing to accept a leader who challenges norms and traditions?
These are questions we all need to think about.
Absolutely.
And this portrait, this one image, has really become a catalyst for that conversation.
It's a reminder that even in this age of social media and instant communication,
Right.
a single powerful image can still capture the world's attention.
Yeah.
And spark a debate that goes way deeper than the surface level.
It's amazing how much meaning and interpretation can be packed into one portrait.
It is.
Especially one as unconventional as this.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, what's particularly interesting is that this portrait, it kind of challenges the whole idea of what a presidential portrait should be.
Yeah.
I mean, traditionally, these portraits have been about projecting an image of stability, authority, unity.
Right.
But this one almost does the opposite. It leans into that controversy, the division, the very things that have defined Trump's career.
It's almost like he's weaponizing the controversy.
Right.
Turning it into a source of power.
Exactly.
And in a way, that's a very modern approach to image making, isn't it?
It is. In today's media landscape, attention is everything.
Right.
And controversy gets you attention.
Exactly. And Trump has always been really good at using controversy to his advantage.
Oh, he's a master at it.
He understands that in the 24/7 news cycle, it's better to be talked about, even if it's negative.
Right. Better to be talked about than ignored.
Exactly. And it's worked for him so far.
It has.
But do you think it's sustainable in the long term? Can he keep governing effectively if he's constantly, stirring things up?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And I think it's something we're going to have to grapple with throughout his second term. There's a risk that this constant conflict it could become exhausting
Yeah, for everyone.
for him, for the country.
It's like we're all living in this state of heightened alert,
Right.
just waiting for the next controversy, the next tweet storm, the next bombshell.
Yeah, it creates this climate of uncertainty and instability.
And that can be really damaging.
It makes it hard to focus on the real challenges facing the country.
Exactly.
If we're constantly caught up in these manufactured dramas,
Uh-huh.
we lose sight of the bigger picture, the things that actually matter.
So where do we go from here?
Right.
If this portrait is anything to go by, it seems like we're in for a bumpy ride.
I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah.
This portrait signals that we're going to see more of the same, the divisive politics that we've seen over the past few years.
Right.
Maybe even an escalation.
Yeah. But you know what? It also presents an opportunity.
Oh, an opportunity. How so?
It's a chance for us to have a real conversation about the kind of country we want to be. Do we want to keep going down this path of division and polarization?
Right.
Or are we willing to try to bridge the divides? Find some common ground and build a better future together.
It's a choice we all have to make.
Exactly. And I think this portrait, this one image,
Yeah.
it's really forced us to confront that choice.
It's a reminder that the images we create, the stories we tell ourselves, they have power.
Yeah.
They shape how we see the world, they influence our decisions, and ultimately they determine the course of history.
So as we look at this portrait, as we think about everything we've talked about,
Yeah.
what stands out to you? What message do you think it's conveying? And maybe even more importantly, what questions does it raise for you about what's to come?
Well, for me, it really highlights the importance of critical thinking, questioning assumptions and being wary of people who try to divide us.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that leadership isn't about projecting an image of strength no matter what. It's about finding ways to bring people together, build consensus and create a more just and equitable society.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
It's a lot to think about, and it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
It is.
We'll be here to break it all down for you as things develop.
Absolutely. And, in this world of information overload, it's more important than ever to be discerning, to seek out different perspectives, and to engage in thoughtful dialogue.
Well said. Thanks for diving deep with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We appreciate you trusting us to guide you through this, complex and ever-changing landscape.